Hello, hello. It's one of those rather sort of warm days here in the Algarve today, so I thought I'd do a little walking tour, as I've got a mission to photograph the two orange trees that were planted in close proximity, so I can send them to the landlord, and he can then, the landowner, and then he can decide what course of action to take. So on to the topic of this video, which I've entitled Enoch, Anatomizing and Internalizing. You may remember I've said on videos, if you take the Neville Goddard interpretation of scripture, how it all flows and makes sense, because it is talking about a spiritual history. It's talking about the metaphysical in the unseen. And of course, taken literally, it materializes into this reality. I feel it's fair to say, and there are countless videos I've looked at opening ceremonies and such like, and have pointed to certain things that allude to stories. There's also the whole thing with specific dates, things played out to coincide with various scriptures and things. It's not for me to go into the analysis. I'm sure you've all seen those type of videos. So on to Enoch, and this is an interpretation from an internalized perspective, and you could say an anatomized perspective, if there is such a word. Distracted by all the beautiful colours here. These beautiful flowers just growing wild. There is a path here, just about. Ouch. So Enoch. It says basically that he was pure in his generations. So when we're turning this story internally and taking such characters as Enoch as archetypes of a story, as Neville Goddard says, you get to play all the parts. Or there is one playing all the parts, and you play out various aspects of the story. So it says of Enoch that he was pure in his generations. So what do we generate? What do we radiate out? I feel is what this is referring to. So what we radiate out, what we generate inside our physical bodies is, I'm just going to pan the camera so you've got something visual to look at. What you radiate out and the thoughts that you generate, where are those thoughts coming from? Are they coming from the mind, or are they coming from the heart? Which is guiding you? Which would you feel would be the better one? And which would you feel, and the key word here is feel, what you feel inside yourself. So what we generate, first and foremost, in the anatomical sense and in the physical sense, we can turn our insides quite acidic if we are in that low negative vibration. But if you then take it the other way to the positive vibration, you're generating something very different inside yourself, which is also radiating out. So I feel that is what Enoch represents, pure in his generations. I'd also refer you to a passage from scriptures. Jason has quoted this one and pointed this out recently on Archaics, where in the story Jesus says to the woman that was going to be stoned to death for being a prostitute, go and sin no more. And it might not have been about sin, it could have been about anything. That's not what the emphasis, and that is not really what the message is about, which Jason has again clearly identified. It is go and sin no more. So to put it in the Neville Goddard context, it is a radical change of mindset. So it is a repentance. That's what that means. Where you have this shift internally. Now Enoch, the E, Albert says E equals energy in that equation. So we're run with that, so that leaves knock. What's knocking? It's, in Christian terms, it's said about Jesus is always knocking on the door, hoping you'll accept him into your life, blah, blah, blah. But again, it's not a literal story of a physical being in its original sense. It's talking about a metaphysical journey. It's talking about a change inside yourself. The knocking, it's the energy from the gut feeling that is trying to guide you. Excuse me. So that's what I feel is what is meant by Enoch being pure in his generations. It makes no mention of whether he was a good or bad person up to that, and I feel that doesn't matter. Again, what is good and what is bad? Who are we to judge? Certainly the system will, and make examples, but for very different reasons. But it's like the mistakes. You've missed taking something, but it's not actually a mistake because they're all learning curves, they're all experiences to grow from. So, with Enoch, returning to that again, it's like energy knocking. It's trying to communicate with you all the time and open up a door inside yourself. It's that Kundalini rising, that Christ consciousness. So, of course, it then says, the last sort of mention of Enoch is, and then he was not. So how do we interpret that? Is it a loss of your individual identity? No, it's a metaphysical reference. He was not. So it could be taken as being the physical form. You could say it's a representation of he's taken out of this reality, the break free or die trying, basically. So it's something to take and put inside yourself. Also consider that Enoch is just one name for this same archetype. You've got Thoth, you've got Quetzalcoatl, and so on and so on. Hermes and such like. It's wisdom, it's knowledge, it's all these things. Thoth is where we get the word thought, for example. I feel that the reference in the Egyptian art of a human body with a bird's head is just purely referencing something that is associated with birds, which is flight, therefore which is air, which represents spirit. Not to be taken literally. I watched on the replay an Archaics video on the Sphinx as well, and straight away it's like, well, that's clearly two-colour stones, and you can see this reflected if you take off a bit of the topsoil, which is drier. You'll find it's damper and therefore darker. So this sphinx that would have been underwater for I forget how many years now, it makes sense that the most vulnerable part would be that the head would overbalance with the softening of the rock from the being underwater for so long, and so it's left with a stump. Now I do wonder when that was first discovered, when there was just a neck left and it was, oh, we'll turn this into a human face. That is also showing something, not only in the colour of the rock, you've got the darker and the lighter, so it's showing you contrast. Now that could also be interpreted as man rising above, you could say, head and shoulders, where it's been recarved on the neck, above his animalistic lower conscious nature. That it could be as simple as that. It could also be an egoic display of a particular pharaoh, but I mean, looking at that face, it looks more sort of very monkey-like to me, the way it's gone. But there, if you do a Google search on it, you do find the odd aerial view, which shows it's like a flat top, so there's clearly something missing. But as has been pointed out and is so readily obvious, the head proportion to the body is ridiculously small, so it makes sense that that was the neck of Anubis. So what does Anubis represent? If we take that to be a hound, it would pick up on a trail. It would be instinctive, I would suggest, with that one. I'm not saying any of this is what it is. I'm just giving you an interpretation of what I feel about these things. And again, that key word, feel. It's what you feel inside yourself. And that will depend on where your focus is, where your attention is going. So hence, when I spoke at the start of this video about opening ceremonies, it's like that's as far as I'm going with that, because I don't want to give any attention and feed into that. From my perspective, there is something very ritualistic, that there's always a story of hidden occult knowledge, and very likely I would say that these things are done in a certain way that is playing to the subconscious of collective humanity, who don't see beyond that superficial level. So they're absorbing a very different message. But when you stand back from these things and see the bigger picture to it all, of course, how it changes. So that's an interpretation of that. Bit of a sort of riddle this week. How do I make, I think it's €3.40 last? It's that sort of situation. I've had a few inquiries about mentoring, but there's nothing concrete happened. So last week I earned €5, which doesn't really go far, but I have to hold with what I advocate is remember the future. And so for the record, you could say that this is a sort of testimony with a projection. But at the same time, I'm sort of holding out an olive branch, as it were. I know what it's like to go, I'm going to have to reiterate this again. To be honest, because I need to create some sort of financial income. And I'd like to do that in a way that, where I'm giving something that far, it's almost too crude to speak of it in this way, but far outweighs the value of the financial exchange for the ways to unlock things inside yourself so you can overcome perceived obstacles. And it's from talking from experience about the anxiety and the depression and the panic attacks, the night sweats, the ringing in the ears, the whole process of the suicide thoughts, going right back with all of these things, that feeling of not fitting in, that going through that hermit mode, the pulling myself out of it. I didn't have any one person that sort of was there that was able to say, oh, I've been through what you've been through, this is how you get through it. So, as much as anything else, that's what is on offer. I'm offering you a way. I'm not saying it's going to work, but it may be that I can unlock things for you so it will make sense. So it's to empower you. It's not. It won't be me doing it. You'll be the one that has to do the work. And yes, it's not going to be easy, but I want to help any one of you that if you want to see this through to the end. And I feel we can very much do this. I feel everything being micro and macro, everything being interconnected, interrelated. So when we talk about the firmament or the dome, I've said this before, I see it as a spiritual umbrella. I see it as something that we generate from inside ourselves, that you won't come to any harm, no matter what the outside world sees, which will have a very different perspective. They probably will see an apocalypse. Whereas, if you're just an observer to it, and you're not pulled into that fear and lower conscious fight or flight realm, all you'll see is an epoch collapse, just in the end of an era, just the end of a chapter, which implies there's a start of something new. Further to talking about patterns and cycles, I forgot to mention in the last video, I refer also to Rudolf Steiner, where he talks about the 7-year cycles. I mean, we're just going through one with this X marks the spot in the United States for the solar eclipse. But on an individual level, you've got that 7-year marker where you get your teeth that your own physical body grows than one's being grown when you're still in the womb. Then you've got the marker at 14 years old, give or take a few years, of puberty, and then 21, which is accepted and recognised as the coming of age, where you're classed as an adult or adult. And of course, Rudolf Steiner talks about at one time humanity would continue with this spiritual growth, so there'll be another one at 28, at 35. So when you come to this whole Jesus story, that's why you have the between the years of 30 and 33, because the spiritual growth was in the decline and is continuing to do so, reflected in attention spans and things as well. So there's plenty of evidence from a whole spectrum that backs up what a lot of other channels that I would sort of endorse on a lot of what they say. But primarily, I run with the whole Neville Goddard premise of it is, we call it God, but you can substitute that with whatever else you wish, whatever feels more comfortable to you if you don't like that word, that label, because that's all they are at the end of the day. But it's God playing all the parts. It's the way I've described it. It's like if you think of the hairs on your head, if you were to imagine you were on the tip of an individual hair and you were thinking you were separate and you weren't connected to the head. I feel that's quite a good analogy. As Neville Goddard expresses it, we are God pushed out, the limit of opacity in this physical realm. But it makes sense to have a physical body to interact in the physical realm. How else could you experience any of this? But the question is, do you feel it is possible to change things or to ascend out of this? I feel it is something definitely worth doing. We we will probably go into what is described as a spiritual evolution of humanity to a Jupiterian age, or it could be a Venusian age, or something completely new. Curiosity about that and wishing to observe it, an exciting change in the development of humanity, I feel, is something worth observing, worth experiencing, worth being a part of, worth playing a role in it. The footprints that we leave in this reality. I mean, what if we do have to come back after we've gone through the doorway of death, and then you have to reincarnate again? What if you have to? Would you not rather pave the way to make the next lifetime a far more pleasant experience for yourself? And I feel we can do that. I feel that is reflected in all this talk of long-term strategies of these elites, or this control system. Seeing the bigger picture over longer time spans than just one lifetime. Because look at the way this reality teaches us to, it's from birth to death and that's it, goodbye, that's the end of you. When that clearly is not the case, evident by the sheer number of testimonies of people who've talked about very young children just coming out with things there's no way they could know. But they're at that age, under the age of 7, where they still have that connection. It's not been sort of hammered out of them, and they've not been programmed with that sort of negative default mindset at that stage. So they're still very open, still very inquisitive, and still very in touch. Again, this is the duality of this reality. You actually come into this world knowing far more than what we're perceived to learn as we advance in physical years. But of course, when you're when a soul that has come into a new vehicle, a new physical body, you got to start all over again, learn how to master it, how to control the vehicle that you're now in, and then learn language and numbers and letters and all the rest of it. All things to sort of pollute and block the mind up with stuff. But whatever happens, I would just go with the whole philosophy of, at the end of each day, just say to yourself, all right, if this was my last day, has it been a good one? Will I look back with the regrets of I wish I had done or whatever? Or has that day been a pleasant experience? I mean, I can say about this one, yes. It's been a fantastic day. And it's beautiful weather. It's not too hot just yet. Anyway, I don't want to make this too much longer. So just to reiterate, mentoring, if anybody is struggling out there, may only take one session. It helps me, it helps you. Well, I hope it will help you. There's only one way to find out, isn't there? It's a stepping into the unknown with everything. If we stay in the comfort zones, we stagnate. That's another big part of this reality. It is about stepping into the known. It is about being fearless. Being pure in one's generations, what one generates in oneself. Love to you all.